Hey guys, welcome to a blog edition, more like a vlog edition, as I try to record something. Um, I have been asked to share some best practices, and rather than type it up like I usually do, I decided to do a little demonstration or show some video, and we'll kind of see how this goes. I definitely enjoy the written format, but also wanted to give the video format a little bit of a trial. Don't shoot me because I'm not a great video editor at all. So this is going to be done in basically one take, and hopefully you find this useful. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here today are the stories in the Sprinter, and I'm going to try to share some best practices that I've picked up over the years and how to use the Sprinter to suit the needs of an agile developed project. Everything that you need is built and available to you here on the Mendix project. There's a lot of training that goes over each and every part of this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those pieces. But what I do want to spend a little bit of time on is how do we use labels, how do we use the description field, and how do we ultimately use the tasks and the comments to capture all the pieces of a requirement that you would need to develop good stories. So right off the bat, and it's okay to critique me on this one. I just happen to pick one at random, where the story for this particular one is titled "Reporting per the Document Provided by Nolan." So not a great story name. What we're going to do is actually update this one to meet the standards that we would normally set for a story. All right, so I'm going to edit this story on the story details here. And instead of saying reporting per the document provided by Nolan, I'm going to change this to say as a, um, I'll just say information consumer, which is the user role for this particular application. So as, let's do this grammatically correct. As an information consumer, uh, um, I would like to get a report per the spec provided so I can inform management of the utilization. Okay, so just a basic following our standards here, name the user role. So what user role are we using? What's the requirement that we're trying to do? Ultimately, we're trying to create a report, and I've provided a specification. And what's the reasoning behind that? So I can inform management of the utilization. That's what this report is intended to do. The description field is where we're going to capture anything that might be useful to the report writers, to the developer, to the testers, anything that somebody could look at this and maybe they don't know what that means to say, get a report. What kind of a report? What other details might we need to know to make this thing work? So, for example, here, in order to produce the type of report that I'm looking for on this app, we're going to need to include the Excel exporter module. That can be found in the Mendix App Store, which I won't go to it right now, but you go to the App Store in your project, download the Excel exporter, and that'll allow you to specify exactly how you want that report to show up in Excel for you. Maybe we'll do that at another time. Okay, so after I've made the story correct, and again, this is the sort of things that I would expect backlog grooming to do after you've captured this. So this is really what you do during a backlog grooming session. The sort of things that the product owner, in this case, I'm the product owner of this particular app, and I've got some people on my team that are building this for me. And so they're the developers. And the goal here is to make sure that you groom these stories so that everybody understands exactly what it is that needs to get done, which I'll come back to in just a second. Okay, so we've added a description to say that this will include the Excel exporter to the project. There's nothing else that I really want to add to the description now, but again, you would feel free to add anything to the description that would be good nuggets of information to the developers, to the testers, etc., that would help them understand what this is all about. Okay, now that we have done this, I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'll come back to story points in a second. Pretend for a moment that this isn't actually here or that it's in running status. Again, I just picked this particular story at random. But one of the biggest things that I see missing on a lot of applications as I jump into ones that have already existed is the definition of done. I'm kind of old school in that I was brought up in TQM and then switched to Six Sigma and became a black belt in Six Sigma. So a lot of project management experience in my background. And one of the things that's always stressed is that you have to have a definition of done. Whenever you're using stories as your requirements on an agile project, as opposed to the full written out functional and technical specs, you still need to make sure that you've captured a definition of done. Otherwise, how will your customer slash product owner or the testers know if that story's truly done? Okay, so the way that we do that, and this is an important distinction as a best practice, is that we use the comments to give us the definition of done. The reason for that is it does a few things. Number one, the description field that we talked about before, as you saw, I can hit edit at any point in time in the life cycle of this story, and I can make changes to this thing. That's good and bad. It's good if you're going to continue to evolve it and add additional footnotes. It's bad to capture your definition of done there because obviously anybody would be able to go in there that has access to this and change your definition of done. You don't want that to happen for sure. So that's one way that we don't use the description field. We actually capture them as comments because other than the person who created the comment, nobody can go in there and delete that comment and remove it so that you don't have the definition of done. If that were to happen also, it's part of the history. You can bring that thing back. So for example, here we discussed what was the definition of done. I spelled it out and said, look, I specifically in this app want a reporting section in my navigation menu for all of my reports. This report should be the first report that I see. So that's the beginning of my definition of done, to say I'm going to expect a new navigation menu section for reporting to exist when this gets completed. And I'm going to expect that the first report that I can click on and run will provide me the report that I'm specifying here. Now, for a report, and I definitely recommend this as well, I went ahead and did a little mock-up. Again, it's not pretty. It's just a quick Excel mock-up. But I said what I'm looking for is a list of the employees. I want to see billable time. I want to see any leave time that they've got scheduled, and then calculated their utilization value. Utilization in the consulting business is just the amount of hours billable over the time that you're not billable. So I want this for a running 3 months, so I can run this at any month and I can see what's happening for the next 3 months. That's the specification for this particular story. So again, a few things here that I've covered is, make sure that your story has a good, clean articulation of what a story is supposed to be, right? What's the user role impacted? What is the specification that you're trying to do? And then lastly, what's the motivation, if you want, behind why you're doing that? It definitely helps drive the conversation. Add into the descriptions anything that you feel would be useful or important for the testers or the developers or even the product owner to specify some key information about developing this, as well as maybe some motivation why, flesh that out a little bit further. Definitions of done, add them as comments, and continue to use the comments while you're going through the process. So let's talk about that. That's the next piece of the best practices here. As you know, in Agile, you've got 3 statuses that you can work with in terms of the story itself. It starts off as to do. So if I click edit here, you can see the status. It starts off in to do. When I go to start that story as a developer, I click it once and you'll see the running button come up. And that means that the story is in progress. Now, another best practice that I want to pass on is, particularly if you're working with any sort of contingent workforces like a consulting firm, but you could do this internally as well. It's really important. The product owner or the testers should be the one to mark a story done, not the developer. Again, that's something that I notice a lot of confusion around who should click the button for when it's done. A developer finishes, they do their unit testing, which is just that in an isolated vacuum, they look at that specific story and say, does it work to how we expect it to work? Well, you don't want them to click it done because it's always going to work. They wouldn't say it was done if it didn't work for them in their unit test. You want to always leave that to your either professional testers, hired testers, internal testers, or in other cases, especially for smaller projects, you can just have your product owner specify that as done. So for the developers, we just mark it as running. And then once we're finished with a story, we use the tagging system, the labels, to do all of the other incremental steps in the workflow that we have found really useful for capturing. Now, you can add labels for literally anything that you want. One of the things that we do as a best practice is if somebody's working on that particular story, when they quote unquote check it out, we have them mark it with their name so that we know which developer worked on this story. Again, it's not as like a chastising tool or a celebration tool or anything like that. It's really so that we can log in history, who was it that worked on that? So if we ever have any questions about it, we know who to go talk to. Just simplifies the communication process. You can add other tags that are important to you, such as what release are you scheduling this for? If you're not doing like just simply releasing on the end of a sprint, if you're doing more incremental releases, or just-in-time releases, hot fixes, anything like that, you can add those tags, are useful. If you're using any special modules or features or anything that are kind of like, hey, some developers might have skills in the Excel exporter or in API integrations or anything like that. Others might not. So you might want to tag it so that only the people that have those skills know that they should pick up those stories. If you don't have those skills, maybe avoid that story until you enhance those skills. Another thing that we use labels, which is really, really critical, is the communication flow amongst the statuses. So for example, if I'm running this story and I pass my unit testing, what I'm going to want to do is communicate to the product owner or the testers that this thing is ready. So I might just simply add test ready as a tag, right? And now when I save, it lets the testers or the product owner, whoever's going to do the test, know when they look in the Sprintr, they're looking for any stories labeled test ready. They can also use search at the source of the stories here to search for anything that is in test ready status. Okay, so now that it's in test ready, the testers will run their tests, and if it passes, they will remove the test ready, and they'll just say something like test passed, or they might, I don't know what this one's using. Maybe they just say passed. Anyway, so they might say that the test passed. Additionally, they might say that the test failed. Now, it doesn't necessarily make sense to add a test failed label all the time, but you can. There's nothing hurting you. What's more important is to make sure that you communicate that the test failed and that it's not test ready anymore. So what we'll usually do is just remove that label that it's test ready and require that the tester or the product owner add a comment that just says something to the effect of why did it fail or where did it fail. So if you've got your test plan and it's organized and you say I'm looking for it, and for example, I log into the application and I don't see the reporting section in the nav menu, I'm going to fail that test right then and there. Even if the report works, it's not where I said it should be. So I'm going to fail it. And I'm going to put a comment here and say, I don't see where to launch this report per the spec that I gave. That will indicate to the developer that if they see a story that is running, sometimes you might work it with your customer to say, set the story back in to-do status. Again, you probably shouldn't do that because of logging your progress in your sprint. But again, to each their own. Every customer's got a little bit different way that they want to deal with it. I don't have like a best practice to say you should always do it this way, but I do have recommended approaches for this. What I recommend is leaving it in running status, adding a tag that says test failed, or removing the test ready tag, and at least adding comments. So that way it will let the user know that if I worked on it and I don't see test ready anymore in the Sprintr, I'm going to go, It's not test ready and it's not test passed. I wonder why. Putting test failed is a very easy way, though, to see at the story level where that exists. And add a comment, add any screenshots about where it failed or what you were looking for, and use these comments. They're really powerful to capture the story behind the stories, right? Yeah, so ultimately use these labels to move things forward. Once it has test passed, then you could mark it as done, or you could also remove the test ready and just mark the story as done. So if it says test ready, it should still be in running status and run your tests. If it passes, put it in status done, remove test ready. If it fails, remove test ready, leave it running, add a comment, and if you want to, add test failed. So there's another best practice that I would pass on to use. So recapping, good stories, good descriptions, use comments to capture any requirements, and definitely the definitions of done. At that point, once you have the definitions of done, that is the good time to come in here as a development team and determine the story points. So now that you understand what it is, why you're doing it, what's involved in doing it, and what the definition of done is, now you can better estimate the story points to help you with your velocity estimation. Okay, that's it. Lastly, I'll point out one more thing here. If you ever get confused or click buttons or kind of wonder what's going on, don't forget that you can use the view history, and that will show you all of the different changes that happen. Let's say you accidentally set something to done. Rather than just keep clicking it and moving it back to running or whatever, you can just go back to here and find where you made the change. Here you can see the history starting from the most recent to the oldest. Find where you made that change, click it, and revert the change, and it'll roll back those changes. Really useful feature. All right, so those labels are really useful. As you can see here on the story summary, I can see all of these labels. Quickly, I can see as a tester, for example, there's something that's test ready. Again, I could just go up here and type in test, and it's going to show me in my current sprint anything that's marked test. These shouldn't be test ready in the feedback, but you get the idea here behind some useful tips for testing. I hope this was helpful. Interested in your feedback to see if the video format was good, or if you'd rather me write more about this and not have to see my face and hear my voice. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.